Hey, this is Liberty DeVito, and you're listening to the Fab Four Free For All.
And we are fading in to a new episode of Fab Four Free For All. I am your moderator for this episode, and joining me as they do every week are my friends Mitch Axelrod.
Hey, everybody. How are you?
And Mr. Rob Leonard.
Hey, how we doing today? How we doing?
And this is unique. Some of you may be listening to us in the usual format on Spotify or however you listen, or through iTunes. But for this time around, we're taking advantage of all the modern technology, and everything that's been going on with doing some teleconferencing here. And basically just doing a video episode. So this week, we're not really weekly anymore. This time round, we were looking at our, what are they called again? The review and analysis shows that we do. And we realized that we'd never done Meet the Beatles or With the Beatles. And, With the Beatles is the catalog album, is the second Beatles 12-inch release. But we all being Americans, I know, Mitch, you got a lot of the imports when they were coming out, but for the most part for us, we grew up with Meet the Beatles as being our album. So we decided for this review and analysis, we were going to look at the very first album released on Capitol Records, which is Meet the Beatles. And there's quite a unique history behind it, and there's probably more of a history behind Meet the Beatles really than With the Beatles. I mean, With the Beatles was really just the next album, I think.
Well, yeah, With the Beatles was the Beatles' next album in the UK. It was the first, quote, official album here, and that's the way Capitol pushed it. But VJ really owned the rights to the Beatles' work prior. So when I Want to Hold Your Hand came out in December of '63, VJ was pissed. And there's a whole, there's really a back.
Well, part of it has to do with the fact that VJ had stopped paying Transglobal, who sold the rights to VJ. They stopped paying them the money, even though there wasn't a lot there. And what happened was the Beatles become the biggest act in the world, and all of a sudden VJ realizes, oh my God, we have the biggest band in the world, but Capitol had sort of gotten the rights back. So the introducing the Beatles, which came out around the same time, they put it out, but then they eventually lost the rights to it.
Well, yeah, so I think we need to, in order to go forward, we need to go a little back, because you need to figure out, what happened with VJ, not with VJ, but VJ had the rights, like you said, and they put out introducing the Beatles 10 days prior to Meet the Beatles.
Right. 10 days prior.
What was that?
No, I said 10 days prior.
Yes.
That's wild.
Well, only because they knew that I Want to Hold Your Hand was selling. But we need to understand about I Want to Hold Your Hand too, and you should really read Bruce Spizer's book, Coming to America. It's really great. But Dave Dexter, who we've talked about so many times on this show, he turned the Beatles. He was really in charge of reviewing all the foreign acts for Capitol to see if they were worthy of an American release. And Alan Livingston, who was the president of Capitol, would listen to him and trust him. And most of the stuff they brought over here and released failed. So Alan Livingston was actually trusting Dave Dexter a lot. And he hated the Beatles sound. He just called them long-hairs. And he said, forget about it. So Alan Livingston said, okay, we'll forget about it. And then when I Want to Hold Your Hand was released in the UK and Dave Dexter rejected it, Brian Epstein got really pissed. And he actually came to New York in November of '63 and met with the Capitol, because Sir Joseph Lockwood said he should. He met with some promotional people and played it, and then they got in touch with Livingston. And Livingston played it for his wife and said, "Are we missing the boat here?" And she said, "Yeah." So the Capitol then went on to spend $40,000 which is one unheard of, to promote the Beatles here. And behind the scenes, Capitol people was telling Brian Epstein, we could spend all the money we want. This is not going to go anywhere.
Well, also, the 40,000 was never all spent.
Right.
The sales were so big, they didn't have to spend it. So they did use a little of it, and there's a lot of different things to promote the Beatles at that time, but they never got through the 40,000, which was a ton of money to promote a song back then. So,
but and to promote a group that you never really heard of.
Right. I mean, but the question is, if VJ had paid Transglobal, would VJ have been given right of first refusal to Hold Your Hand?
They would have owned everything until 1967 if they had paid it off. Yeah, but they
trouble.
What was that?
They had financial trouble, so they couldn't pay.
Yep.
Right.
Matter of fact, one more thing: those Four Seasons got out of their contract with VJ for the same reason. They weren't being paid. Eventually, they sued them, and they got the rights to all the masters.
Unbelievable.
So,
and the funny thing is, there's a copy of a telegram that was actually just on eBay, and it's actually in my hand, not the actual one because I didn't buy it. I made a copy. So it's a telegram from VJ to Capitol on January 14th, my mom's birthday, in 1964. So it's 6 days before the album comes out. And it says, notice is hereby given that VJ is the authorized distributor of the Beatles recordings. VJ has commenced legal proceedings to require Capitol to cease and desist from further interference and infringement upon VJ's right. We hereby notify you that any manufacture and sales of Beatles recordings on the Capitol label is a violation of VJ's rights, and liability will be extended to persons conducting such manufacture and sales. VJ Records.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, they missed it by like 2 weeks or something.
Missed it by that much.
Yeah.
Well,
it's amazing, though, because VJ was trying, but they still had the rights for a little bit. So when I Want to Hold Your Hand came out and went number one, he said, "Screw it, we're just doing it." And they, even though they were still in financial trouble, they got it out and. Introducing really became the first American album.
Right.
And Introducing was just really the British Please Please Me.
Minus 2 songs.
Yeah.
Right. And Meet was really with. So EMI was...
But it wasn't.
Right. We'll talk about that.
So that's what's interesting about it.
But one more thing. We mentioned Bruce Spies' book. We should mention our friend Alan Cozen's book also.
Oh, absolutely.
You got that something, because that's the history of I Want to Hold Your Hand and various stories and background information. So both those books are excellent starting points, finishing points, whatever.
Right.
I think we talk about the starting point. I think really when it comes to looking at the difference between the two albums, looking at the difference between the labels, VJ and Capitol, or the similarity there, really, we have to kind of go with the word greed.
Yeah, well, sure.
14 tracks in the UK, 11 or 12 in the States. In the case of Meet the Beatles, 12. In the case of some of the other albums, 11.
Yep.
I mean,
there is a reason, though.
Of course. Go ahead. I mean,
the way the British did songwriting credits, it was, let's say you put out a record that had 20 songs on it. One record would get divided 20 ways, where in America it was based on per song fee. So Capitol purposely took off, and they didn't want to do 14 because they had to pay more. So it was most of the time 11. Meet the Beatles and Rubber Soul.
I'm a little confused, Rob. Isn't it the same idea, though, the way you kind of broke it down? There's 20 songs that's broken up.
Let's say it was.
Right.
So let's say it's an album sold for $4, we'll say.
Right.
Each song would whatever the publishing would be cut in 20 places. In America, each song was a fee. So let's say it was 4 cents a song. You would pay for let's say Meet the Beatles. You would pay let's say it's 48 cents. But if it was 11 songs, you'd pay 44 cents. But if you're dealing with millions of copies, that adds up.
You bet. So the idea is, what was a 14-song album over there.
Right.
Became a 12-song album here with Meet the Beatles. And there are differences. There's also the idea too that, and we talk about this a lot. And it's funny because we talk about this, but I don't know if this really was always the case or if this was something that was intentional. But they didn't like to put singles on the albums. Singles were, really meant to be standalone devices for them. So over there, where, I Want to Hold Your Hand was actually backed with This Boy over there, and Saw Her Standing There, which is the second track on Meet the Beatles, was actually the flip of, was actually the opening track on Please Please Me.
Well,
you get a 1-2 punch of the A and B side of the single on With the Beatles. So,
Yeah, right.
There's a lot. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but it's just fascinating how this all worked. But I think we've kind of covered a lot of the background.
But
I think we can really go into the album.
Well, yeah, you have to also think about where the state of music was at that point, 1964, especially in terms of albums and singles, because singles in America were really selling like crazy. Teenagers were buying singles because they were more affordable.
Of course.
So you could really afford that instead of an album. Albums were mostly sold to adults who were into Sinatra, who were into Nat King Cole, Sing Along with Mitch, not Axelrod, but Mitch Miller.
But also soundtracks too were big.
Right, very big.
Broadway and Hollywood.
But
let's face it,
adults.
What was that?
But with adults.
Yes.
So right.
Beatles, Meet the Beatles was one of the first albums that really made kids go out and buy albums because they needed to hear every song of the Beatles because they were so crazy for the Beatles. They couldn't just take, the single and flip it over a bunch of times. They needed to hear everything because the Beatles had such a powerful energy. And that's another thing that we should discuss because Capitol purposely wanted a very positive, upbeat energy as a first impression for the Beatles, because forget about introducing it at the moment. But that's why they didn't put This Boy on the flip of I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Right. Give them a rocker instead.
Upbeat, energetic first impression. Even though this was on the album, they didn't put it on the single. So this album really started a big trend a lot of ways for America, for kids buying albums. And as you said before, Tony, it started the precedent for Beatle albums and other groups on Capitol, but especially the Beatles, where they did the 14 versus 11 and taking here and there. So this meant a lot, this album.
But it's also, to me, it's also always fascinating because we sort of talk about the idea that the mania, like the kids wanted more. The kids always wanted more. They didn't want to just have the singles. They wanted to hear the album. They wanted to hear more from the Beatles. But it fascinates me too that because there was the mania, they went out and bought the album. They wanted more Beatles. But when you looked at what had come right before them, and I jokingly trash like the Bobbies, Bobby V and Bobby Vinton and Bobby, but Bobby V had some tremendous singles. The Beatles covered a song that Bobby V did. But you bought a Bobby V album, and for the most part, you were buying 1 or 2 singles and then the filler. You bought a Jan and Dean album in 1962, 63, 1 or 2 singles, the filler. Even as great as Brian Wilson was, the Beach Boys, 1 or 2 singles, filler.
Yep.
It's fascinating that it like lined up, like the mania of the Beatles when kids felt that they needed to go and buy the album now also coincided with the fact that the album was not filler.
No. Also, you had 2 records released basically at the same time on 2 different labels. And that's a major thing too, because VJ, cashed in as much as they could off that, introducing the Beatles. They released a ton of singles off that, which Meet the Beatles didn't have as much. And it was available, if you think about it. The mania was there, but also the music was there too. Right. It was like, it's, okay, I just bought Meet the Beatles. In 2 weeks, after I get my allowance, I'm going to go buy Introducing the Beatles, or the other way around, however you wanted to do it.
Right.
And also, Top 40 Radio jumped on this. They were playing album tracks off this album. It wasn't just I Want to Hold Your Hand and I Saw Her Standing There. They played Don't Bother Me. They played Little Child.
When had they ever done that before?
Not really, no. Not WABC in New York and WMCA here in New York also.
You weren't going catalog deep on your Connie Francis records.
No, they didn't do that. Well, yeah, that's true. But there was so much available just for the 3-month period. You think about it, January, February, March, that it just got all sucked into the system.
Well, so don't forget that Capitol also purposely didn't take any of the covers that were on with the Beatles.
There you go.
Well, Until There Was You was the only one.
And
right.
The only reason they might have done that is because the Beatles performed it on the Royal Variety Show.
Right.
And they were going to do it on Sullivan.
I was about to say, yeah.
And if you also read the liner notes for Meet the Beatles, it does reference the Royal Variety Show. I believe. Yeah,
and the liner notes are a fascinating part of that album. Sorry.
Oh my God. The liner notes basically take a shot at VJ without taking a shot at VJ. Because the liner notes are really basically saying this is really what the Beatles are. This is the official album. I mean, the funny thing is, you've read about them in Newsweek and the New York Times. It's funny that today there isn't a Britisher who doesn't know their name. What is a Britisher, by the way? Is that?
I don't know.
The hottest property. And it's funny because it says, consider these manifestations. I wonder how many people have actually read the back of Meet the Beatles.
Great.
But in Newcastle, 4,000 fans stood all night in pouring rain. In Portsmouth, the queue started 90 hours before the box office opened. In Carlisle, frantic schoolgirls battled police for 4 hours in a do-or-die effort to gain admission to a sold-out show. And in Dublin, Ireland, the Beatles' first visit set off a mob free-for-all, resulting in unnumbered broken limbs.
In Des Moines, everyone still wanted to see Bobby V. Sorry, we love you, Des Moines. We're not going to lose Des Moines.
And it does reference the Royal Variety performance on the back too. Yeah. And it also says they're going to be in a feature film and they're going to be on Sullivan for 3 times on his Sunday night show. So, they would.
Does it do with they're coming to your town? Isn't there like they're coming?
No, that's the Monkees.
No, but really didn't do that on purpose. That was not a setup. No, I mean, don't they do it like they're touring also, or allude to them coming around? I don't remember.
They're getting ready for a royal welcome in America. Ed Sullivan signed them for 3 appearances in rapid succession on the Sunday night show. They're shortly to film in England a feature-length United Artists movie for worldwide release. And here is their first Capitol record, 12 of their most sensational songs in their wildest Beatlemania style.
But now we talked about this too, and you mentioned the fact that they took off the covers that had been on appeared on with the Beatles. But I find it a fascinating kind of investment in Lennon-McCartney, or confidence in Lennon-McCartney, in a sense that even with the Beatles, now here you have Capitol who didn't want them to begin with. Really, we didn't want to deal with them to begin with. You have the VJ album that has a bunch of covers on it. If you think about it, there's a whole bunch of covers on the VJ record.
Right.
And now you've got these liner notes touting, well, here they are. This is what they really are. And now you've got an album with almost all Lennon-McCartney. There's one cover on here.
Right. No, I don't think it was done on purpose. I just think they were all rockers. So I think they just, they wanted this to be a rock and roll album.
But wouldn't you have wanted to throw on something with familiarity? Wouldn't you have wanted to pull something? Because by now there were tracks, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't think I am, there were tracks that had, by the time of the preparation to Meet the Beatles, you had some rockers that were going to be held over for what would be the Beatles' second album on Capitol.
Right.
Already been recorded.
That's true. Right? I think they maybe thought, well, everyone already has the Chuck Berry song. We don't need Roll Over Beethoven. But look what happened. Roll Over Beethoven was imported from Canada, and it charted you don't see imports charting on Billboard really a lot, and that's how popular the Beatles were 2 months later. That Roll Over Beethoven charted via Canada. So
the fact remains that this album was #1 for 11 weeks starting in February, and it was only displaced by the Beatles' second album.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And like you said, Rob, all the covers that were on With the Beatles that Capitol didn't want on this one were on the Beatles' second album.
Yeah, and it works out very well, actually, because the second album is even more, I think, intense than the first album. And then Meet the Beatles. There's an intensity of the second album that just the way it was put together that, even to this day, you sort of have to listen to it separately, not the songs separately, but the way they put it together. And with the weird Capitol echo on some of the songs. And there's a certain intensity about the second album. The first one is all rock and roll except for Till There Was You. But the second one, maybe because of the covers and everything, it's just it just jumps off the disc.
We have a whole show about that, folks. You can go and listen to our Beatles second.
Yeah, and I think they do. I think, though, it was a smart move by Capitol because you had to establish the Beatles for what they were. And if you had all the covers on the first official album, then, who are the Beatles? They're a cover band that did a few original songs. But if you did it like they did it, it's basically all their originals, like Tony said. And then after they're established, then you could put out covers because people are already going crazy for the Beatles. And don't forget, by the time the second album came out, I think Can't Buy Me Love was released simultaneously.
Just about the same time, yeah.
It was March of '64, I believe.
Yeah, it came out like a week or two.
Yeah, it came out in March, and then the second album came out first week in April.
Right, so it's originals, a single, and then there was still original stuff on the Beatles' second album, too. But
I still find it so fascinating, though, that you're going to take what is sort of a band that, the single's now taken off, and the single, was it because the single was originals that they figured, oh, you know what, let's just throw it in the water and just give everybody, give an album worth of originals? I don't know.
It could be. VJ released covers for singles, and they released a George Harrison vocal, which hadn't happened for a long time with the regular Beatle releases. So that could have been part of it too.
Rob,
also, I'm sorry, Mitch. No, you go. No, you go.
I just think, on your point, though, Rob, I think VJ was just releasing everything they had.
Right, they had 16 songs. So.
Right, and they just did it. They weren't thinking covers, non-covers. They would just, look, we got a group named the Beatles. They're, let's see what they do. And especially after I Wanna Hold Your Hand hit, then they knew they were going to lose the rights anyway. So they just threw it out there.
They did. You're right.
So that's why,
it's amazing, the VJ. But they knew eventually they were going to get the VJ stuff. They just had to wait for the court to say, okay, you can own this until the end of the year, basically, is what they gave VJ. So
Right.
We could talk a little bit about the album cover.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about the album cover? Absolutely. I was going to do that after the music, but let's talk a bit about the cover.
Well, the cover, Robert Freeman took it. Very famous picture. Very stark black and white. Over here, they decided to tint it blue. And funny story, I didn't know this prior to researching for this show, and maybe I should have. I'm giving myself up now, verbally and visually. But I didn't know that George Harrison actually showed Robert Freeman Astrid Kirker's pictures from Hamburg and said, we want it done like this. Can you do it like this? Because if you look at Astrid's pictures,
definitely,
with the like very moody, half shadow faces, not purposely. Well, maybe it was purposely. I would have to ask Astrid, but he actually took those photos to Robert Freeman and said, "Can you do it like this?" And Robert Freeman obviously did, and it was done in like a half hour in a hallway with a black background, according to Paul, but you never know, Paul.
The Beatles have been used to doing things for a half an hour in the hallway. 5 minutes long. Anyway, usually in Hamburg, too.
Well,
there you go. But yeah, you ended up with this iconic cover.
So iconic.
Yeah, and But I remember, like I said, for me, growing up with Meet the Beatles, I thought there was something wrong with the Beatles, that it wasn't blue,
No, that's a good point. That's a good point.
We didn't get it until later. I didn't get that album until much later with the Beatles. So you're right. You grow up, and people in UK, when they imported it, probably thought, what are they doing making it blue? But, it's weird because in America, the word the Beatles on the top was olive green, and then it was brown, and it depended on what copy you got or what plant made it. There were so many different variations of colors, and even different colors of blue. I remember I used to get a bunch of copies, and one of them, it looked like the Beatles were much more in focus, where you could see more of them than some of the other copies I had gotten, which you couldn't really see. I also thought John Lennon looked kind of chunky in the picture.
He did, actually.
Well, he was. He was a little, he was a little heavy then.
Chunky.
Well,
It wasn't until 2 years later he got chunky.
Well, that's when he started to write about it.
his Fat Elvis period.
His Fat Elvis period, as he calls it.
Yeah, but that wasn't 53.
No. But with the Beatles is more of a black and white. The blue tint with the Beatles. I could swear that I remember seeing a brown tint somewhere in the 70s when it might have been re-released. But I've never come across it.
You mean the top portion where it says the Beatles?
Maybe that's where
it was in brown and green and olive, and it was in every different color.
And we should say that the cover for the EP All My Loving in Great Britain, you could actually see, they're wearing the dark sweaters, and you can see like a little bit of the scene, so to speak, where with the Beatles and Meet the Beatles, it's dark. You don't see as it's a little darker per se. It looks
you don't see like the Ruddles outlines. Clear as day. Yes, clear as day.
So that photo was used a couple other places besides Meet the Beatles. It was All My Loving too.
And we may want to add that also to the songs from the UK single are songs on Meet the Beatles that are in fake stereo. I Want to Hold Your Hand and This Boy are in fake stereo on the stereo version of
right.
Only because a stereo version of I Want to Hold Your Hand wasn't mixed until what, 66, Rob? When was it? Or no? I want to say there was another release that had a real stereo, but I think it was.
Wasn't there an Australian?
I'm thinking
that was a different mix, but that was another mix along the way. Yeah,
that was
for Australia.
Again, mid 60s or so.
Yeah.
If you remember, I think the 1984 promo. I Want to Hold Your Hand when it came 20th. It actually says on the label, "This is the first American release of the true stereo recording," or something like that.
Right. Of course, the single was mono, so it didn't matter.
Right. So, do we want to talk about the songs, or do we want to take a break and then come back and talk about the music? Talk about the. It's not even really we're talking about the music. I mean, we are.
But it's well put together. It's a good order. You know.
Yeah. So all right. Let's take a break. We're gonna come back, and then we're gonna talk about the music.
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, folks. This is Tony from Fab 4 Free For All. As Mitch has mentioned several times, the cast of Fab 4 Free For All do not profit in any way doing these shows for all of you. In fact, we actually lose money because of studio time and other production expenses. Now, we have looked into show sponsors, but for a number of reasons, we've decided it would be in the best interest of all of us, including you, our listeners, not to have sponsored ads in our shows. So, what we've done is set up a Patreon account. Patreon is a crowdfunding platform that allows artists to obtain funding from patrons on a recurring basis. Now, it can be as little or as much as you think you can send to us for the work that we put into providing quality Fab 4 Free-for-All shows. Now, we know that we have thousands of worldwide listeners, and if each of you just contributed $1 a month, that's just 25 cents per episode. We would have enough to retire and not have to do these shows. Sorry. Seriously, though, we've gotten some great feedback from everyone about how much these shows mean to you, and we feel the same way. But it would be nice if we could break even in terms of costs so that we can continue to bring these shows to you in a timely fashion. Yeah, I know, we can be delayed every once in a while, but that's because, as John Lennon so beautifully said, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. But we do vow to make every effort to have a quality show to you every week. We only ask that everyone go and visit patreon.com to at least check out what it's all about and to see if you can contribute a little something in return for all the hard work and effort that we put into these shows for you. Just do a search for Fab 4 Free For All and tell us that you give a buck about what we do. Thanks to all of you for being such great, loyal listeners.
And we are back, and it's time to talk about more music. But Rob, you had a point that you wanted to.
Yeah, one thing about Meet the Beatles, and they couldn't have planned this, obviously, but 5 of the songs on the record were played on the Sullivan shows. So the record comes out sort of towards the end of January, and then 2 weeks later, the big 73 million people watching it on the Sullivan show, and 5 of the songs over the next 3 weeks are part of the Sullivan show, which really, I'm sure, helps sell the record. But also, the parents were watching Sullivan more than the kids in many cases because, it was Ed Sullivan. All the parents watch Ed Sullivan. And, I'm sure that helps sell the record to the parents too, saying, oh, these guys look nice. They're singing Till There Was You. They seem like they're gentlemen, and that was a big deal,
Yeah. Well, no, he wasn't telling anybody to rattle their jewelry on this one.
Right. He didn't say that. And it wasn't like in the press conferences when they all would ask him about, all the press would say was, oh, what about, are those, when are you getting a haircut? Or, how much, are you guys millionaires yet or whatever?
Well, Sullivan also gave them their props in terms of...
Right, he did. He loved them.
They were nice boys, Sullivan. Yep. And again, you got a guy that's coming into everybody's house every Sunday night, and he gives thumbs up. Hey, why not? It
was like Johnny Carson, when he used to give his thumb up to the comedians.
Yeah.
You got that. You were set for life.
Yeah, Ed Sullivan used to get other fingers back from comedians.
Yeah. Jackie Mason. But we're looking at the sequencing. Oh, sorry, Mitch, go ahead.
No, we were going to just talk about sequencing, right? I was going to say, we want to start talking about the songs, but I think looking back in hindsight, 56 years later, I think side 2 is a weaker side. And I do think that now, again, back then, I don't think anybody was caring about sequencing. The Beatles were so hot that it was just people were running into record stores and selling, buying everything Beatles, whether it was records, memorabilia, whatever. But I think looking back now, side 2 is definitely a weaker side. I would have put certain songs on side 2 if this was maybe a later album that after the Beatles were established. I think I would have done a little more in terms of sequencing. Now, for what it was, Rush released and not Rush released. Well, yeah, it was actually. But I think they did okay, but we should talk about...
Well, you said give more attention to sequencing, but let's look at the attention to sequencing given here. You got the British, the American single, the Capitol single, I'm Gonna Hold Your Hand, and Sort of Standing There. You got the British B-side, This Boy. Then you've got the next 9 songs, all they are the tracks from With the Beatles minus the covers in the same order.
But nobody knew about With the Beatles. This people knew. Nobody, unless you were...
Well, Capitol would have. They would have gotten the tape. They got the tape with the Beatles, and they said, okay, we're going to put the first 3 songs, the singles, the A and the B side, and then the British B side, and then we ran out of time. Let's okay, folks, take care.
No, but the point is though, that's what we're saying though, Rob. There was no way to
gauge it here as a buyer unless you were a merchant seaman who got the album overseas and you bought it for your kid or yourself or your whatever. You wouldn't have known about With the Beatles. So there was no way you could have said, well, all they did was put With the Beatles after the single. Nobody knew about it then here in America.
No, that's true.
But talk about just sort of, really not caring. Like, aside from the fact that, like I said, it still stuns me that they went this head on with doing all originals, taking all the Beatles originals. But the idea being that no care was paid to the sequencing. When you got to the Beatles' second album, you had a hodgepodge, but you had a hodgepodge that somebody had to have thought about.
But every album subsequent until Help or Rubber Soul was a hodgepodge of a mix of British.
Of leftovers of stuff, you know? You know, I've Just Seen a Face was a leftover from British Help. And they said, oh, we got to put this out. Oh, look, there's this new album coming out, Rubber Soul. Oh, we'll have it open the side. And, you know, whether that was meant to be an acoustic thing that like a lot of people think of, but it was probably just more of a random thing. I mean, think about it. They, you know, Capitol called up the Beatles one day and said, hey, we need 2 songs for our next album. Can you record something? And they recorded Bad Boy and Dizzy Miss Lizzie. Right. And Dizzy Miss Lizzie ended up on Help. And Bad Boy eventually ended up on Collection of Beatles Oldies. Right,
and they snarfed 3 songs off of Revolver to put them on, you know. But we're getting ahead of the timeline here. But I'm just going with the idea that at least for the Beatles' second album, somebody, I don't know if it was just, well, we got, you know, here's the bunch of the Beatles songs we own. Let's do this one, this one, this one, this one. That's 11. Okay, we're done. Here's Beatles' second album.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But somebody had to have thought at least about that sequencing, and we always talk about what a hot album Beatles' second album is.
Yeah,
right. No, I think
mind-blowing. You know, we do an episode on it. You know,
right. I think the deal is they might have had a little bit more time on Beatles' second album compared to, you know, Beatles with the Beatles comes out November 22nd, and with this comes out January 20th. So they had less than 2 months. There was a Christmas break in there. We all know the record companies take off for Christmas. Right. So there might have been less time just to look into it and do it that way. That's the only thing I can think of. And then think about it. I Want to Hold Your Hand gets played on that radio station in D.C. with Carol James and Marsha Albert. And then a week later, WMCA jumps on it. And the rest of the country is on it. And Capitol wasn't going to release I Want to Hold Your Hand until January. Right. So all of a sudden they're saying, okay, what do we have to do now? And then they say, we have to get the album out now. So there wasn't much time, I think. I never realized that, you know, the order was the same. But, you know, now you brought it up, it is a very good point.
Right.
So
right.
I don't think there was a lot of time with the second album either, because that came out very quickly after this. I mean, this was number 1 for 11 weeks, as we said, and then it was displaced by the Beatles' second album. So how much time did it I don't think they really cared about sequencing there either.
They probably spent more time on the cover.
Yeah.
They probably did. But if you remember on the second album, it said includes She Loves You and Roll Over Beethoven. Roll Over Beethoven, of course, comes from Canada. She Loves You comes from Swan because the contract ended, and they ended up with the rights to it. Well, they ended up on the album. I think Swan had the single. They couldn't put it on the record, or the LP. But Capitol could put it on the LP, so that's why it was there. So,
just a weird.
You know, there's a lot of record company gibberish there too. So that's something to think about also. You know, it wasn't just Capitol. They were trying to beat up on Swan and VJ, and that's why they kept saying the Beatles on Capitol, the Beatles on Capitol, and even look at in Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl. What's say our latest Capitol record? You know, they didn't say our latest VJ record.
Yeah.
So
right.
You know,
right.
It's something to be thought there.
Well, should we take a look at the music in order here?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Sure.
You start off with we were talking about sequencing, and you said that the second side is the weaker side, but I do have to say this. When I was growing up, Don't Bother Me is what sold me on the Beatles. I've said this in other episodes before. Side 1, I dropped the needle down and I got that single that I was already familiar with. I was 5 when I got the album, and which was, to be transparent, was 1970. So I get the record. I'm 5. I knew the single up, down, and sideways. But when I flipped to side 2 and I dropped the needle down, I got Don't Bother Me, and that was like revelatory for me. That was, oh my God. And I loved All My Lovin' and, different songs that I knew from the radio, because the radio was still playing All My Loving in 1970.
Radio was playing every song.
Yeah, well, not really. By 1970, by the time I was listening to, by the time I was listening to pop radio, really from this, you'd still occasionally get your This Boy oddly enough. And you'd still get, but it was really All My Lovin', This Boy, So I Stand There and I Want to Hold Your Hand that I knew from the radio. And everything else, All My Lovin' rather, and everything else was, was an album cut. But you're right about the second side being kind of like, yeah, you do get the song. You mentioned that it was a ballad, Rob, but Mitch, you had mentioned off mic, Tilda was used also from a musical.
Yeah, which I think also sold the parents on the album, on the Beatles, because, Sullivan had to have had Shirley Jones on there from the Music Man, because he had so many different, how do you say it? The people from different plays doing their songs. So, Broadway was in New York. So I think if you see Paul McCartney now doing Till There Was You, well, then, they can easily go into a store and say, all right, I'm going to buy the album because I saw that long-haired kid do the song, and it's pretty beautiful. Same thing with This Boy. The harmonies of This Boy really were something maybe that were, going forward from groups on Capitol, like the Beach Boys, I think you said off mic, Rob, the Beach Boys, Everly's, all those harmony groups. And now, it's a slow song, but they showed their chops. So I think adults were liking This Boy and Till There Was You, and it made them go out and buy the album too for their kid, where maybe they wouldn't have.
I always look at This Boy and All I've Got to Do as also very soulful vocals. And we're talking about the way that the vocals fall. You have a couple of Lennon vocals in a row at one point on side one. You have 3 Lennon leads with McCartney doing part of them. You have 2 McCartney leads in a row, Till There's You and Hold Me Tight. But I find it fascinating that in the press and the way the Beatles were always approached, John was still being kind of held up as being the group's leader. Whether it's press conferences, whether it was, it was always sort of well, it is John's band, and over to you, John, to get a. But yet on the albums, both the British and the U.S., John wasn't really represented as the leader. I mean, Mitch, the photo behind you.
Yeah, the photo behind me is if you look, there's Paul, right? Well, my hand just disappeared, but there's Paul, and he's up front. Again, I don't think they did it on purpose, but. No.
John's tucked away in a corner down there, so
the Paul's right here for me.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that still even image-wise, John's not being sold as the leader, even though like I say, press conferences, things like that. It's still that idea of Lennon as the band leader.
Well, that's why it wasn't Johnny and the Moondogs for very long,
Right.
I think John liked the fact that he had equals in the band with him. But he always wanted to be the leader. I think that was always part of it.
The Sullivan Show, Rob, the vocal mic, the mic wasn't, the mix, as they said, many times they had it all down and the cleaning people messed it up. I think the mixes were more in favor of Paul. And
well, they had John's vocal. If you look at the February 23rd
it's great.
Edition, that mix is the best mix. So that was recorded before they went live,
right?
The same day, February 9th. So something happened along the way where no one realized it, and that's what happened. But you're right. The February 9th version the February 23rd version is this fantastic mix. And maybe the technology they used on Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl, where they were able to separate everything via a 3-track, can be done again to the Sullivan Show, because even though there was some disappointment among the Hollywood Bowl, there is a lot more difference in the fact you hear Ringo's drums and Paul's bass a lot better on the new mix of Hollywood Bowl, and I'm sure they can do the same for the Sullivan Show.
But I think the Sullivan Show, his mic was well down in the mix, so I don't know.
Right.
I don't know if there's anything to work with.
Well, that's part of it. Yeah, his mix, his vocal, especially on the February 9th show, is not good. Let's put it that way. I can't believe they didn't realize that as they were going along. I can understand the first song they screwed up, but the second song they should have been right on top of.
Yeah, but
they really weren't.
Paul, the first thing the Beatles are seen in America, the first time, other than Jack Parr's little
right,
time they're seen, who's doing the lead singing?
Right. Well, there's points where Paul isn't doing the harmony vocal. You don't hear John.
Well,
So,
yeah, but again, Paul's doing All My Loving to start the whole show.
Right.
right.
That's why.
Right.
That's why. I mean, I know it was February and this was released in January, but I mean, again, in terms of sequencing, we could sit here and say, hindsight is 2020. But now, again, back then the Mania. If you want to know what the Mania was all about, go see the "I Want to Hold Your Hand" by Zemeckis with Eddie Deason.
Right.
It really does represent so well what the kids were doing at that point. They were just running into the stores, and it didn't matter what they were grabbing as long as the Beatles were on it. It didn't matter. So, are we overthinking this now? Yeah. Back then, as long as they got the Beatles on an album, they were buying it. And again,
Right.
we talked about the first Beatles bootleg, or off mic, the first Beatles bootleg where you just saw the mop tops and it was like on GRC Records. It's called the Original Greatest Hits. It
Right.
never said Beatles, but it was Beatles recordings, and people were buying that as well because
People were buying a lot of crazy. People were buying a lot of crazy stuff because you had bands like the Bugs that were like the bands that were at the supermarket displays,
Right.
and you had kids at home, and the parents were going, oh, my little girl likes this group, the Bugs. I don't know and then she's checking out of the supermarket, and there's the Pickwick album by the Bugs. And they go, oh, that must be it. And there's how many of those records sold because Grandma and Grandpa had no idea.
a ton.
Right.
But
Yeah.
there's also
Everything, though.
what was that?
We can't blame Grandma for everything.
Yeah, poor Grandma.
One thing also about the record, we're talking about the Beatles as presented as four people. George and Ringo get a song on the record as singers. Right. So that's very important also because, that's the way it was presented also. They each sang a song when the Beatles played live. And George would, of course, become even a better songwriter along the way. But that's the way they sold the Beatles. It was the four of them. It wasn't John and Paul doing everything. It was, they had George and Ringo there too. And of course, Ringo, let's be honest, Ringo was the most popular in America, especially in
Ringo and Paul.
Yeah. So
and even the Soakies they made, the Soap Suds things, they were just Ringo and Paul.
Right.
And don't forget who did the first song in the Beatles' first ever concert.
Huh?
Is this a quiz?
Roll Over Beethoven. It was George.
Right. I was like,
okay.
I'll think for a second what you were talking.
No, I'm just saying in terms of who's representing the Beatles. There's no leader. George does the first one in concert. Paul does the first one on the Ed Sullivan Show. Not John.
No, that's a good point.
But if you look at the beginning of George getting the short end of the stick, you look at the idea that you look at Meet the Beatles, and there are how many George Harrison lead vocals? One. Look at my finger disappeared. You look at Meet the Beatles, how many George Harrison lead vocals do you have? 3. So you've gone from Devil in Her Heart, Roll Over Beethoven, and Don't Bother Me.
Covers.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's true.
But still, though, just in terms of George's presence on a Beatles album.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, and now he writes his one song, and then as far as writing credits go, he disappears for another year and a half. Pretty much.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. By the way, Mitch, when you were talking about the movie "I Want to Hold Your Hand," when we were talking about the cover before, I think in the movie the covers for Meet the Beatles have a brown tint, not the blue tint in the movie. A little thing, but I think that's where I was talking about the brown tint from that movie.
Yeah, again, that could have been just props. That's why.
Right. That's what I'm thinking too. But that's what I think I remember.
Which record store they went into to buy their copy that day.
You see a mistake in that movie because when they do run into the store and go to buy the album when the album first comes out and everybody's in the store and they go to buy it, when they're you see a scene where they're reaching for the album and they take a Meet the Beatles album out, and it bends because there's nothing in it.
Oh, that's funny.
It definitely bends. I'm like, oh wait, does she know that she's getting ripped off? She's just buying a cover.
No, it was the very brief RCA Dynaflex.
I don't think so.
All right, shall we look at the music? We'll look at the music.
Yeah, quickly.
Music.
The album starts with the 1-2 punch of "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and I saw her standing there. Thank you very much. A lot of great 1-2 punches in Beatles, 1-2-3 punches too. Even you got the White Album, you got Beatles for Sale and Beatles 65 with the 1-2s.
Wait, the White Album has 1-2 punch?
1-2-3.
Yeah, tell me two Dear Prudence?
Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence and what's that, Glass Onion third? That's like a great opening. That's not a one.
Well, Pepper has a great three-punch if you're looking for that.
Yeah, Pepper's got a great three-punch. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I like those.
I like, No Reply.
Yeah, that's what I said.
And Babies in Black.
Babies in Black. That's what I said. Yeah, but with the Beatles and Beatles 65, same.
I guess.
Could we even recite the first 3 songs off Beatles 6 without looking at I don't even know.
No,
anyway,
I couldn't.
Yeah,
I couldn't.
That's pretty funny. All right, so you get the 1-2 of what's that?
I don't count it really.
Of I Want to Hold Your Hand, and I Saw Her Standing There. Then you get the ballad, This Boy. And again, you were right, Rob, tucking that in the third song right in the middle, throw the ballad in, slow things down a little, let the girls swoon a bit. And then comes the opener of With the Beatles, It Won't Be Long.
Tony, we were talking a while back. I think All My Lovin' should have been the opener of the album because regardless of I Want to Hold Your Hand being the single, it's on there and people knew it from Murray the K or people knew it from somewhere that it was on there. So it didn't matter that it was, the opening, like if you looked at the back of the record and had to read, I still think All My Lovin' would have been a great opening punch. And then as you said at one point, I Want to Hold Your Hand because of the dum 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 dum.
Right.
That would have been the album closer.
As an album
closer.
Yeah, but they wanted people to know it right away, and I think that's the only reason. All My Loving could have been a single too, and it wasn't a single. So
it was in Canada.
In Canada, yeah, it was,
right.
And it was brought down along with Roll Over Beethoven as a import. So it's something to
hear, right?
Yeah.
It did chart here. So all right, so it won't be long again. All I've got to do, quirky track, but you mentioned Mitch a lot of soul. What's that?
My favorite Beatle tracks ever.
Mine too.
I don't know, quirky.
Rhythmically quirky.
Rhythmically, it's like 4 different rhythms in one. I mean, it's one of those John songs like where he just doesn't care about how the rhythm goes because it's in his head that it's this way.
Right.
Well, also Ringo did that famous, beat, which he used again on a ton of other things, like In My Life and
No, you're right.
Yeah, but you got to admit though, as far as what we'd seen before in rock and roll, quirky.
Yes. Oh yeah, definitely.
But the Beatles were quirky. Then you could say that about everything the Beatles did, as far as what we've seen before in rock and roll. I mean, the Beatles redefined rock and roll.
Little Child.
Well, that we can see.
So I mean, yeah.
That one I didn't like when it on the album. I usually skip that one.
How funny.
I just didn't love that one. And
well, the best part is it's short.
When I got my first acoustic guitar and didn't know how to play either that or the harmonica, I recorded a cover version of that when I was like 8.
I don't know. It
was bad.
Even, I know I'm bringing up the Beatle cartoons, but even when the Beatle cartoons had it in there, I didn't like the episode that it was in. So,
Little Child?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Even like an Indian reservation was stupid.
Okay. So all I've got to do, and again, we've gotten 3 Lennon vocals in a row there. This is your 3rd Lennon lead vocal.
Well, 2nd, because this boy is a threesome.
Harmony. Yeah, threesome. Right. Okay. All right, so we go down to the song you were saying could have easily been the album opener, which is All My Lovin', which was the opener on Ed Sullivan.
Right.
But after the fact.
What's that?
After the fact, because Ed Sullivan was a month after, 2 weeks after this came out.
Right. But still, though, again, calling attention to the song, back to the idea, as like Rob was saying, 5 songs from this album performed on Ed Sullivan.
Yeah, very strong.
Opening side 2 with the Harrison track, but Don't Bother Me.
I think that's a great side opener because the way it's a long chord progression to get to the first vocal, and you didn't see that a lot in Beatles songs because they didn't have long openings. It's a long open considering the rest of their songs. Really, I mean, da 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 da. I Want to Hold Your Hand's pretty short. Don't Bother Me is a little bit longer because it has more chords in it.
Yeah,
a lot of chords in that song.
Yeah, and it's also again rhythmically quirky.
Yep,
that's true. All sorts of rhythmic oddities here. What's that?
Like that Latin beat.
Yeah. Oh yeah, brilliant.
And heard in rock and roll.
Yeah.
By the way, the one longer song probably opening is "Roll Over Beethoven."
Yes, that's true. That's a little longer.
George again. Little Child is the Lennon composition. Minute 46. You kind of, Mitch, you kind of label this one the throwaway.
I don't like this song. I mean, it's okay, but it's nothing great. I mean, it's weird that I was just thinking about that Billy J. Kramer then did Little Children later on.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Little Child, Little Children, and then, of course, Gary Glitter.
No, man, don't go there.
Whoa. But one thing about Little Child is it has everything you want in a nice Beatles hit. You have a great McCartney bass line. You have the harmonica, which was John's new thing at the time, and it's a fast moving song. It's got a lot of things in it. Great piano parts. It's just not much of a song.
And it's the only time. What's that? What was that, Mitch?
I said, thank God it's short.
Nice.
Yes.
It's the only time you get the Beatles doing the Beau Brummels, I'm so sad and lonely. I mean, obviously the Beau Brummels started from the Beatles, but it's the only time you see the Beatles doing that like early 60s-ish, I don't know.
Well, they did it.
No, that's a good point. Like a girl group thing.
Girl, they did it.
Which one?
Thank You, Girl.
Yeah, that was.
You big. That's true. That's true.
They're very close. They're very close in the way they were put together, and very close when they were written together.
Yeah.
March 5th was "Thank You, Girl," and when it was written, probably a little before that. But
right.
So it's not a bad song. It's just not a great song.
No,
that's the difference.
And now you've got "Till There Was You" from the musical, "The Music Man," written, performed by Sophie Tucker. Kidding.
Yes, our favorite group.
But again, what a beautiful song, though. I mean, it's really funny that it's just such a highlight for Paul's sort of music hall sensibility, I guess. But his chops, yeah. It's a great song.
And also, George's guitar solo didn't exist in the original, so. He really turned that instrumental break into his own. It's really a beautiful. Yeah. It's one of his best solos, really, if you think about it. And he plays it so nonchalant, like here I am. I'm George Harrison. I'm gonna play this great solo.
Yeah, that's a really good
Sullivan show.
What's that?
He did the solo well on the Sullivan show.
Yeah, that's true. He made it look so easy.
Because the solo, and I saw her standing there, as we all know, he couldn't do the same twice.
No, but that's the genius of him. That how many times did he do the song live, and there's different guitar bits in each one. Yeah. It's very amazing for that song only, really, because he didn't really do it for other songs. But for that one, he was always changing it, or upgrading it, or fixing it, or making it better, or whatever.
And yet, Paul to this day can do the same song for 100 shows and do it exactly the same way with the same I'm sorry.
I know.
That's cool.
All right, now you get to the song that plagued these poor bastards for Hold Me Tight, which, is it Lewison or somebody makes a comment in one of the books about the fact that, how could you have a song that took them like 100 takes over like 3 or 4 sessions and you got that, I think it's a great song personally. No, what's that?
I don't.
No, not a fan.
I like the song, but it's also like Little Child. It's sort of this Beatles on automatic pilot.
It's a stomper.
It's a stomper, but it's like, okay, we have this. They could have easily written songs like this for the rest of their lives, but they wouldn't be the Beatles. they would have
Right.
stopped in 65 or 66 or
No,
something.
they would have probably been writing for the Dave Clark 5 or something. No,
Yeah.
they would have been like writing for other bands' album fillers. I don't know.
Right. No, and this would have been maybe someone else's album filler.
Right.
It's not bad. It's you're right though. It never sounds as good as it could have been. And we've heard a lot of the outtakes, and it's like, okay, it just never goes anywhere. But it's okay song. Between that and Little Child, which one do you pick?
I pick Hold Me Tight.
I would too.
Mitch?
You don't have both on side B. Again,
Right.
Good point.
You're doing this later. If again the Beatles were so hot that nobody cared about sequencing now, but if this was an album that you put out 3 years later down the line, and you're thinking about sequencing, you don't put both of these on the same side.
No.
You don't.
You're absolutely
That's true. Good point.
Yeah, you're
Good
absolutely
point.
But I always found that with Hold Me Tight, when you do hear the outtakes, you hear hundreds of outtakes, and you sit there and you go, oh, well, that sounds good. That sounds good. And you hear this with like Paul's voice kind of like semi-cracking at points and phrasing being wonky. You're like, this is the one they finally figured out was the keeper.
It's sort of like What You're Doing. Yeah, exactly. Look what you're doing. Hi, you. They don't know what they're saying on that. And George Martin just said, "Oh, screw it. They're not going to get this any better. Let's just put this out." So,
right,
like the earlier version of What You're Doing, it's Hold Me Tight.
Good point. Good point. I like that.
And now here's the one that we're gonna give to Ringo and the Stones, and just throw it out and see what happens.
It's funny because you said they might have been doing filler, might have been doing other people's, their stuff. It turns out that their filler was the Stones' first single.
And how many number ones for how many other bands in the Brian Epstein farm after the fact?
Right. No.
You want to be a man?
No. Where I'm going is how many songs literally that the Beatles threw away became.
Right. But this one, I Want to Be Your Man, it is album filler.
Yeah.
But it was the Stones' first single.
But like you said, at this point, Ringo had, talk about how cool it is that like here's Ringo became like the rage in America and like the favorite Beatle with the fan club and whatnot. And he gets his, 2-minute rave up on the album. And that also becomes a concert favorite for them too in the States.
Yeah. But also, you know what? Out of was also in A Hard Day's Night. So I think there's other places for this song. And Ringo's done it live for part of his all-star band for many years. This is a better song than the other two we were knocking, only because I think the backing vocals are really strong on this, and they sort of take over on Ringo, whether it was on purpose or not. And it's also a very short song, also. So, but this one works better. This one works better. It's not much on the lyric. I want to be a lover, baby. I want to be a man. That's basically it.
A rave up from a musical standpoint. Holy Jesus, that middle break is insane.
Oh yeah, they're on fire on this song.
Yeah.
They're just this is a great version, so to speak, that they carried over many years.
Yeah, it was a great capture to grab this. And again, we keep saying, well, it's a weaker side, but we're talking about Don't Bother Me, Till There Was You, I Want to Be Your Man, and now this one, which closed
second time.
Oh my God! Like, to me, is this it? Like on the British album, it's Buried. It's the second to last track before the album closer. Here, it's the album closer, which I guess in a way highlights it more because it's an album closer. But I guess we'll look at, is this a lost classic?
Yes.
To me, it always, yeah. Don't forget, with I Want to Be Your Man, it starts off with that guitar twang. I want to, and the same thing with this. It starts off with that one bang, so they had a way of doing that. And I think you get two in a row of just, that one note setting you into a frenzy, especially if you're a Beatlemaniac, a teenage girl at that point. I know the New York Times said the Aeolian cadence or whatever the hell that was.
Yeah.
But it is a great track, and I think it is a really cool piece of pop that is very underrated in the catalog. maybe not by by Beatle fans, but I mean, if you said to a Beatle fan or even a non-Beatle fan, name 100 Beatles songs, this one, I don't think this would come up.
No, but
what kind of?
It's also. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I think the musician. I mean, look. Let's face it. It was covered by the Pretenders. Been covered by a couple.
Robert Palmer covered it too.
Robert Palmer did a great version.
And he also gave it a new verse. He gave it a new verse.
Yeah.
Oh, he did. And Palmer had a semi-hit with it when it came out on Album Rock stations. I remember that because it got played.
Yeah.
And also the topic isn't. It isn't your regular love song. It's like, oh, I have to go through this again. It's in many ways it's almost a prequel to Norwegian Wood. In the topic, in this kind of a sadness in the song that he's going back to this person or a woman, and I'm going to get beat up again, basically. Not a second time. So it's a very adult song for.
Well, it's a once bitten, twice shy too.
Yeah. In that sense. Yeah.
Did Warrant do that?
Once Bitten, Twice Shy was Great White. But it was actually a cover of who did the original. I've got the original, but Great White did the cover. That was the one who had the hit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do we need to talk about the critical reception of the record? I mean,
No.
It's considered
one of the top, whatever.
One of the top albums. It debuted on number one. Sold by December of '64. It had sold a little over 4 million copies.
And that's what issue with the RIAA. Because right now, if you go onto the RIAA Gold and Platinum website and put in Meet the Beatles, it says it's 5 platinum, which means it sold 5 million copies. So if it sold 4,045,174 copies by December of '64, tell me that it only sold less than 1 million in the next 54 years.
Yeah, 50-something years. That's brilliant.
Sorry. There's record sales that are not being recorded here because they didn't pay the royalties, which is why Hall of Fame.
Well, one thing also, that's why the Beatles keep suing Capitol. It's like, oh, you're not counting again this week or this year.
We know where all those albums went, though, Rob. That's the point. We know whose trunk they're in.
Yeah. Okay.
But
that's a different show.
That's a different show.
Yeah.
But in 2003, the album was ranked 59 on Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time, and then came in at 53 in a revised list in 2012. Obviously, CD releases, we've seen it done twice, but we have to stress that the version that comes in the Capitol Albums Volume 1 is the true U.S. mix. Right. The fake stereo.
Yes.
Fake stereo till This Boy and I Want to Hold Your Hand, which didn't come out in stereo until later. And you get the mono and stereo on the U.S. Capitol versions, whereas on the reissued American Albums box, they're the UK mixes just sequenced.
Not all of them. There's an American unique mix. They kept it, but a lot of the dual opic stereo stuff, that was all replaced because of iTunes, of the iTunes thing. It's because they wanted iTunes to make sure it sounded good.
But they put in the dexterization, though.
Some of it was like on Beatles 65.
Yes, right.
I Feel Fine, and She's a Woman has the. But then again, that wasn't Dexter. That was George Martin basically shoving down Dexter's throat. Like, you want echo? Well, here's some echo, because the mix was made by George Martin. Now maybe Dexter had even more on it, but it was original. Like, George Martin was much tougher than we think he's the British gentleman. He was a tough guy, He's like shoving it back in Dexter's face after being rejected all these years,
Wow.
So think about it. It was at the end of '64. He must not have been happy what happened with the Beatles' second album with all that dexterization and stuff.
Good God.
So,
the one thing I will say is, if you look at the singles from this album, there's one.
Yeah, there's only one single. Yeah.
Now they released in January. They released it in December of '63. Okay, This doesn't come out until January 20th.
Right.
What's the next single from the Beatles?
Can't Buy Me Love.
In when?
April.
Well, no,
March.
it was end of March. End of March. So, but think about it. That was a long time.
Yes.
You know, they didn't have, you know, songs on the chart for 30 weeks. They would be on 15 weeks, and that was like, okay, we got to get the next single out. You know?
Yeah, but it's surprising that maybe they could have. And now again, contractually, I don't know what. I'd have to look it up. Why couldn't they release All My Lovin'? Even if it was 3 or 4 weeks later, it could have. You know, it could have been put out as a single.
No, I agree. I think part of it was considered so old by then. You know, With the Beatles comes out in November of 1963. Oh, that's old. That's old. And even the Beatles talked about stuff being, oh my God, I can't believe, you know, I saw her standing there. You know, they thought of that from 62 or 63. You know, and that was only a year earlier.
What's Mitch? Go ahead.
No, She Loves You. When John said this is an oldie, some of the old people might remember it.
It's from last year.
This year. I mean, think about that. I mean, they were putting out so many singles, you know, rapid fire after.
Right. No, you're right.
I just think it's weird that only one single came from this album.
Yeah,
I agree. It's hard to believe, and it's such an important album and an iconic album when you think about where things start. You know, we don't think of introducing the Beatles, even though it was released at the same time. We think of Meet the Beatles, and maybe because, you know, the 5 of the songs were on the Sullivan Show. Maybe because everyone bought this more than the VJ album, even though they're both available, you know, at the same stores. So one more thing I want to mention is in 1987, when they standardized the catalog, you know, this was deleted. So, maybe it didn't sell. I mean, it was still on cassette, but as an LP, wasn't available after that. So, then it comes back 2004 and then 2014, like you said, Tony. Mm-hmm. One thing for collectors wise, the original pressings of the album did not list if it was an ASCAP or a BMI.
First pressing.
The first pressing. If it was a ASCAP or BMI, song, because they didn't know, and so the first pressings didn't have it. So if you ever find it without it, it's usually probably maybe a little worth more money, but who knows? It depends how you collect things. Right. Our friend Dennis, when he was alive, one day I'm hanging out with him, and we were going through a dumpster after a record show, and he pulls out Meet the Beatles in perfect condition. He opens it up, and he goes, "Okay, this doesn't have the BMI ASCAP." And he looked at me and goes, "I know you don't have it. Here, it's yours." And he was right. I didn't have it. I didn't even know about it at that point. So, but now I do.
There are so many. I think I read somewhere there were 28 variations on it or something.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. Different things.
Well, do we rate this? I mean, I know we always do that at the end of an analysis and review show, but do we rate Meet the Beatles? What do you do? I mean,
it's so iconic. It's if it's not a 10 or 9 even, what's wrong with us? But you know what? Side 2 is a little weaker than side 1, but so what? I play side 1 more than side 2. I do that with the Help album. The side B of Help is not what I call a great side. Right. So I play side 1, which I think is
give it
one of the most perfect side.
Give it a number. Go ahead.
9.
I'm going to give it a 9 also.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 9 also.
Just because of the,
because
of maybe stupidity we're doing right now. Because again, the hindsight's amazing. Yeah. But the fact that Little Child is weak to me, and so is Hold Me Tight. It's such an iconic album. I mean, if it's one album to own as an American,
it's this one.
American.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I agree.
And also, we talked about the cover before, but how many people copied that cover? Seinfeld, everybody. Lord knows everybody covered that. Even
you're right. You're right.
Everybody.
I think for me, I did one of those, Facebook things of like the 10 albums that affected you most in your life.
Right.
And this was one of them. And, I'm sitting here giving it a 9. But from my youth standpoint, this album was a 15. There was nothing like this.
I have 5 copies of this album in my collection, not because of collectors, BMI, ASCAP, and One doesn't have produced by George Martin. I wore the crap out of this when I first got it, when I was 2. I wore the crap out. I have it behind me. You can't see it because I have a virtual background, but behind me, I have the original copy I had when I was 2. It's beat to shit, but you know what? I had to have 5 different copies just when in the 60s alone because I wore this thing out. It was the Beatles. It didn't matter what music was on it. It really didn't to me. It was the Beatles, and it was just so iconic. I stared at the cover for hours. I really did.
Cool.
So
I as you guys know, I collected the British versions first, so I didn't have this for a long time.
wow.
Because when the first time I started to collect was like 79, 80, and then and I'm saying, okay, I got to go back. So I went, as you guys know, the British albums first. But in the mid 80s, when I started to play this a lot, when I started my Beatles show in 83, 84, because we only had the American records there. So I think that's where I started to gain an insight into the album, and not just Meet the Beatles, but the second album and Beatles 65 and stuff like that. So
can I just say one thing? When I see this album in different incarnations, meaning later, like on the lime green or on the orange or on the apple, it doesn't look right to me. It has to be on the rainbow. It's weird.
Right.
When you Meet the Beatles on apple, I'm like, no, sorry. It has to be.
That's a good point. Yeah, because they did put everything on Apple for a while, and that's a very good point.
Even the green lime, even the Capitol orange one, if it's not on the original rainbow, I don't consider it like an authentic Beatle. I don't know why.
That's great.
And one thing I want to say, I'm glad Apple woke up to the fact that the American albums had to come out. I mean, they did volumes 1 and 2 in 2004, 2006, but in 2014, basically putting out the entire American catalog. You know what? It was a nice thing to see. But also historically, these albums fit in. And I know people who don't want the British albums because they grew up on the American albums.
Yeah.
And I think that's important too, because we can make our own CD, so to speak, or our own Spotify playlist now, or whatever you want to do. But you know what? That order is how we remember it. Yeah. Or certain people remember it, and that's very important too.
You can't mess with your memories with that. So
no, you can't. You're right. It's right there, and for me, 62, 66 goes what help, and then we can work it out. I think whatever the help side is in my brain, and if I don't hear that way, then I'm like, okay, something's wrong.
Something's wrong.
But yeah.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this episode, and thank everyone for joining us. And we've been doing an analysis and review of Meet the Beatles and
Beat the Beatles.
Beat the Beatles. Nice. We're talking about parodies. And for Fab 4 Free For All, I've been your moderator for this episode, Tony Traguardo. Joining me has been
Mitch Axelrod
and Rob Leonard.
And we will see you, and maybe you'll see us.
Never see us again.
Sometime soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Fab 4 Free For All was edited and produced by Tony Traguardo at Word of Mouth Studios in Westbury, New York. The opening and closing theme is Not Alone by Barry Waller. Be sure to visit our website at www.fab4all.com.